Brainwash, be gone. A podcast for women who've left a high control, high demand religion. In every episode, we deconstruct one specific rule you were taught so you can let go of the harmful conditioning and live an amazing life on your own terms. Today, we'll be talking about
you'll only need your degree if your husband dies.
So many of us heard this growing up in high control religions, and on the surface, it sounds almost practical, like someone's trying to give us helpful life advice. But those of us who've lived inside these systems know the deeper truth. Statements like this were not advice, they were limits. Limits on our lives and on who we were allowed to be. And now that we've stepped out of that world, we can finally look at this with clear eyes, honest language, and using our full intelligence. So stay to the end of this episode if you're committed to escaping the conditioning that taught you to stay small. So let's start with a surface explanation for why we were taught this. Often it was framed as being part of God's design. We were told, okay, men are the providers, the protectors, women were meant to nurture and support and raise a family. Full stop. That's it. That's your whole role. Everything else that a woman might have, like education or skills or ambition of any kind, all of that was outside of the pre-drawn box for our role. And this may have shown up a few different ways depending on your particular culture that you came from, the particular high demand religion that you were a part of. Maybe you heard things like, a degree is good to have, you'll probably never need it, or education's just a safety net, or your husband will take care of the finances and your job is to take care of the home and the children, or you're just getting a degree because an educated man would appreciate having an educated wife and it will help you raise your children. And it sounds loving, it sounds spiritual, it sounds pragmatic on some level, especially if you're raised in that kind of culture where you just do not see women doing things with their degrees, even when they've earned a degree. But underneath of that apparent pragmatism is really such a clear message. Growth is not for you as a woman. Education is not for you as a woman. Your life path is not for you. How crazy is it that you have permission to be a person in your own right only if you're widowed? Like, what? That's such a terrible basis. Like, maybe you could be an independent person one day, but only if disaster strikes and the love of your life dies. Like, okay, that is crazy. A lot of us, as we go on in the situation, or sometimes after we leave, we start to uncover the deeper motives behind rules like that. Keeping women financially dependent keeps them tied to the system. If we don't have income, leaving is a lot harder than it would be if we were able to take care of ourselves and our children. If we don't have education, questioning doctrine that's suspicious is harder. If we're not independent and we don't have access to that independence and we don't have any experiences of living in that independence as adults, then saying no is harder in all contexts, basically. And of course, a lot of these institutions function on free female labor, lots of hours of volunteering, creating programming, lesson planning for, kids programs, caregiving, hospitality, administrative work that we all offer generously because, we were told that's our spiritual calling. And of course, who could fail to notice that educated women are much harder to control, and the lack of ability to control is completely at odds with membership in a high control, high demand group. When we're educated, we tend to ask better questions. We notice inconsistencies. We recognize power dynamics. And honestly, that causes a lot of us to eventually leave. And I want to be clear here that having an education is not what gives us our intelligence or our raw skill set. Education can teach us how to direct our natural intelligence, our natural abilities, but it's not what makes us smart. So if you haven't had any formal education, which a lot of people, that's something that's cut off to them, especially as women, if you were raised in some of these groups, that doesn't mean that you're not smart or you're not logical or you can't push back on the system. It's just that education, in my experience, in a lot of cases, sharpens our ability to do that, or at least our confidence in doing that. When I became a lawyer, it did not change my innate intelligence or my analytical mind. Those were always there. But what it did change was my confidence in my own analysis of a situation. Previously I may have thought, oh, well, maybe there's something I'm missing here. Who am I to know, why that? It doesn't seem like it makes sense to me, to little old me. But, there are people who understand a lot more than me. Maybe that's why this doesn't make sense to me. But then afterwards, I was much more likely to insist on clarity, to press on if answers were unsatisfactory or irrelevant or misleading or attempting to placate me. It just was like, before I would have been like, oh, well, maybe I'm misunderstanding here. And then afterwards I was like, no, I'm going to keep asking until I get a good answer. Discouraging women from education is not just theology. It is downright strategy. Strategy for how to control. My boyfriend recently saw this magnet and he brought it for me because it reminded him of me, and I love it so much. It has an image of Princess Leia from Star Wars, and it says, "Well-behaved women rarely defeat empires." And it feels like educated women are also more likely to be involved in defeating empires, not helping us be better behaved, which I love. So press on, whether it's formal education or just educating yourself by doing things like listening to podcasts like this or reading books or just learning about new things and new ways of thinking. It is so mind expanding, and it helps us escape the limitations of what we were taught. So let's talk about what this teaching, the idea that you'll only need your degree if your husband dies, what does that cost us? And I feel like it's cost us a lot more than what we necessarily admit. I mean, it's painful sometimes to think about it. A lot of us didn't pursue careers that we were perfect for, or we shut down our intelligence so that we wouldn't be intimidating. That's in quotes. Don't intimidate the boys, Boys don't like that. Some of us lived for years or decades believing that our ambitions were making us less spiritual. And when an entire community is centered around beliefs like this, it really affects more than just the women, because families are more fragile, the daughters are shrinking themselves, the sons are, learning to take authority that they haven't earned. And partners enter relationships with built-in power imbalances that just continue throughout the duration of the relationship. And the community is really losing out on the gifts and the leadership and the innovation and the brilliance of half of its members. So it's really a teaching that it limits the women, and it's just damaging to society overall. And there's such a flaw in the logic of this rule in general. It creates a false dilemma where your two options in life, your two experiences as a woman is allegedly, okay, you're going to be either totally dependent on another human to take care of learning, thinking, and providing, or else you're going to be alone, widowed, and then you're going to do that entirely. It's like, what a bizarre dichotomy, honestly. And there's no concept of partnership or equality or shared growth or collaboration in partnership with each other. How weird is that? And how strange that you also, when you think of potentially being widowed, and this has not been my experience, but I just think, oh my gosh, can you imagine if you lost someone suddenly that you were entirely depending on to do all of these important adult activities, and then you suddenly had to jump in to start doing that? And when you had, potentially decades without practice, adulting generally is not something that people learn overnight. So it's crazy to think a piece of paper that you have, this degree that you have, that in itself is enough that you could just jump right into, being fully comfortable in a career and earning an income and managing your money and, running the household if you'd been totally limited from doing that before. Like, how wild is that? And of course, it totally ignores other very real possibilities that women do face. Like, what if he just abandons the family? What if he turns out to be abusive? What if you need to get a divorce? Like, those are realities that people definitely face. What if your marriage is great, but then he's in an accident, he doesn't die, but he's incapacitated, and now you're taking care of the family? Like, there are a lot of other outcomes besides la-di-da, we're happily married and he's taking care of everything, or he's dead and then suddenly you're taking care of everything. And so there's just really not a realistic look at life and all of the unknown things that can happen to us in life, unexpected things. Sure, we all thought that our marriages were going to last forever. I certainly did, and here I am. I'm divorced, very happily so, I must say. Best decision I ever made in my life. I should have more episodes about how awesome divorce can be in the right circumstances, and I think I probably will. But we just never expect that when we get married young or when we're told how the future will be. So let's talk about some new ways that we could see things. This old rule is rooted in control, but what can we replace that with? What are some options in terms of new ways to look at this? And here's what I believe, and maybe this will resonate with you too. I think education matters because you matter as an individual human. I think women are entirely equal with men. I know it's crazy to even have to say that out loud. It's shocking in some of these groups. Hey, we're people too. We are also intended to grow up fully as adults and be fully functioning in all areas of life, including career and earning money and understanding how the world works. I think that any curiosity or ambition or talent that you have, playing that out is not selfish. I actually think it's a tragedy if you are not able to play that out. I think that's a waste of our lives when we don't grow and expand in the ways that we are capable of doing and that bring us joy. I think your mind is sacred. I think your gifts are sacred. And I think your independence is sacred. Heck yeah, we need to be fully formed adults, and we don't need anyone's death to validate our dreams. We don't need to be widowed to start living our lives. So as we're closing here, I want to just think through a few reflections. When did you learn that your ambition was dangerous or unacceptable? And who was it that taught you that? And how have your beliefs about this topic shaped your own choices? Do you want to make different choices? Are there choices you want to reclaim right now? What would it look like to honor your own growth as something sacred, not conditional? What if you could just be whatever you want to be, no matter what your age or circumstance now, and you just started on that path? Who do you know who would appreciate having this podcast as part of her life? Send her a link to the show page at www.brainwashbegone.com.